What would you do if one day you opened your door and saw your grandfather sitting at your gate with 2 suitcases, and next to him was a note that read, "You take care of him. We can't handle it anymore"? That's precisely what happened to me 2 years ago. My dad had the heart to kick my grandpa out of the house at 5 o'clock a.m., just one day before Christmas. Why did he do that? And what did I do to help my grandfather cope with the pain of being betrayed by his son? Let me tell you every detail of what went down in my family. Hello, everyone. My name is Daisy. I'm 32 years old. Right now, I live with my husband, Brian, our 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, and my grandfather, William, who's 78. We share a 4-bedroom house with a garden in the suburbs of California. I used to work as a sales director for a restaurant chain in California, while Brian was the head of HR at a real estate company. Life back then was manageable. Our income was just enough to support our family and take care of Sophie. Brian is a strong man. He always knew how to balance work and family, and he's a fantastic dad to Sophie. Sophie is the greatest joy in our lives. We weren't rich, but we never lacked anything. Every night after Sophie went to bed, Brian and I would sit on the couch, talk about the future, and dream about the good things that might come our way. But then, 2 years ago, something happened to my grandfather, something none of us saw coming. And from that moment on, the lives of the 4 of us took a turn we never imagined. I remember the exact date, December 23rd, 2022, just one day before Christmas. At the time, Brian, Sophie, who had just turned 4, and I were still living in a small 2-bedroom rental near my office. It was around 6 o'clock in the morning. We were all still half asleep when the sudden ring of my phone cut through the quiet. Still groggy, eyes barely open, I fumbled around on the nightstand for my iPhone. The caller was Mr. Bruce, our kind neighbor who had lived next to us since we moved in. He's a 65-year-old retired firefighter, lives alone, and has always treated my family like his own. I was surprised he was calling that early, but something in my gut told me something wasn't right. I picked up immediately. On the other end, Bruce's worried voice came through. "Daisy, I see your grandfather sitting outside your gate." Still half asleep, I rubbed my eyes and asked in confusion, "Are you serious? Grandpa's supposed to be at my parents' place." Bruce responded firmly, his tone dead serious. "I'm not joking, Daisy. He's been sitting there for the past 30 minutes. I thanked him quickly, hung up, and jumped out of bed. Seeing me rush out with a panicked look, Brian immediately grabbed a thick coat and followed me outside. He didn't say anything, but I could see the worry on his face. When I opened the door and stepped outside, the sight in front of me stopped me cold. My grandfather, William, who was 75 then, was sitting on the cold concrete step in front of our gate with 2 worn-out suitcases beside him. A piece of paper was hastily folded and shoved through the handle of one of the bags. His face was pale from the cold, and his eyes were fixed on the ground, filled with shame and despair. I didn't ask a thing. I rushed to him, grabbed his arm, and helped him inside. At that moment, a strange, uneasy feeling crept into my chest, a silent warning that the peace we had known in our little family was about to be completely shattered. Sitting in the living room, watching my grandfather shiver uncontrollably as the cold sank deep into his bones, I felt an overwhelming ache in my chest. His trembling wasn't just from California's harsh winter air, but from the shock and heartbreak of what had just happened. Watching the painful scene unfold in front of us, Brian couldn't hold back his emotions. He covered his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking as he cried silently. Grandpa didn't say a word. He sat quietly on the couch, eyes blank, staring at the floor. I didn't rush to ask what had happened. Instead, I immediately turned the living room heater to its highest setting. Then I went into the kitchen and made him a cup of hot coffee with some sugar and cream, just as he liked it. When I returned with the coffee, I glanced at the 2 old suitcases. That's when I noticed the paper, hastily folded and shoved under one of the handles. Curious and uneasy, I carefully pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a scribbled message. "You take care of him. We can't deal with this anymore." At that moment, the pieces started to come together in my head. I began to understand what had happened. My parents had cruelly kicked my grandfather out of their house and dropped him off that morning, like he was some unwanted burden. I immediately grabbed my phone and pulled up the front gate security footage. On the screen, it was clear they had dropped him off at exactly 5:32 a.m. In the video, they didn't say a single word. They opened the car door, helped him out, placed the 2 suitcases beside him, and drove away without looking back. After watching that clip, I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. A wave of rage surged through me. Impossible to control. I picked up my phone and called my parents right away, but neither of them picked up. Almost 20 calls in a row, and still nothing. I sat there staring at the screen, listening to the cold, repetitive ring, hoping someone would answer and explain what had just happened. About 20 minutes later, once the room had warmed up thanks to the heater, Grandpa slowly spoke up in a hoarse voice. "I'm sorry for bothering your family so early in the morning like this." Hearing his words of self-blame, Brian quickly responded, "Please don't say that. You're always welcome here." Right after Brian spoke, I gently asked him, "Why didn't you ring the bell when you got here? We would have let you in." Grandpa fell completely silent after my question. A few seconds passed in stillness before he finally replied, his voice filled with shame. "I didn't want to wake you guys up." Hearing those sincere, loving words broke my heart. That year, he was 75. In the middle of being abandoned like that, his first thought was not to disturb us. The room fell into a heavy emotional silence again. About 2 minutes later, I decided to ask him directly. In a soft voice, I said, "Did my parents kick you out?" He nodded slowly in response, his eyes full of sorrow and defeat. He was still clearly in shock, the kind of shock that comes from being cruelly betrayed by your child. I pressed on, trying to understand. "Did they give you a reason?" Grandpa took a deep breath, then replied in a shaky voice, "No. Last night they packed my things into the suitcases. Then they woke me up at 5 this morning and drove me here." After saying that, he fell silent again. I could tell he was still trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions inside. A few seconds later, he added, his voice filled with pain, "They said they couldn't live with me anymore. Then they brought me to your house." I nodded slowly as he spoke, trying to process everything. At that moment, there was only one thing I knew for sure. My parents had thrown him out without giving a real reason. And I decided to get to the bottom of it. That morning, around 7 o'clock a.m., Sophie started to wake up. The soft tapping of her little feet on the wooden floor signaled the start of a new day. We quickly prepared breakfast for the whole family. Toast, fried eggs, coffee for the adults, and milk with cereal for Sophie. At the dining table, Sophie looked at Grandpa with curiosity. She had only seen him a few times during the holidays, but with that sharp intuition kids tend to have, she seemed to sense the tension in the room and didn't ask many questions. After breakfast, I turned to Grandpa with a clear sense of resolve and said, "I'm taking you back to see my parents. We're going to get some answers." Grandpa stayed silent for a few seconds, his eyes resting on the still steaming cup of coffee. Then slowly he gave a nod. Maybe he too was ready to hear an explanation for what had been done to him. After dropping Sophie off at preschool, I called my office to take the day off. Worried about Grandpa's condition, Brian called his boss and asked for the day off so he could come with me. We both knew this wasn't just any ordinary day. About 30 minutes later, we arrived in my parents' neighborhood. It was a relatively quiet area with the typical single-story ranch-style homes all over California. As we got within a few houses of my parents' place, I suddenly noticed a white moving truck parked right in front of their gate. 2 movers were carrying cardboard boxes and furniture into the house. My younger brother Tyler and his wife Olivia were standing nearby, overseeing the whole process. Watching what was happening before us, I began to piece together why they had kicked Grandpa out. Everything started to fall into place, painfully and clearly. After finding a parking spot, Brian and I carefully helped Grandpa out of the car and walked toward the house. Tyler saw us, saw Grandpa, but didn't say a word. He just glanced over and looked away. Olivia gave a stiff nod, but said nothing. Her face was filled with discomfort and guilt. Ignoring Tyler and Olivia, I walked Grandpa straight into the living room, where my parents were sitting on their usual brown leather sofa, holding coffee cups like nothing had happened. The moment I saw them, I didn't bother with greetings. I asked straight out, my voice firm, "You kicked Grandpa out so Tyler could have the room, didn't you?" Without hesitation, without even trying to hide it, my dad replied with a blank expression, "That's right. Your house is bigger. It makes sense for you to take care of him." That cold, emotionless answer made me lose my grip. My voice shook with anger as I asked, "What the hell were you thinking? Who does that? Dumping him at 5 in the morning?" My mom jumped in before my dad could respond, trying to defend what they had done. Her voice was quick, like she was trying to justify it to herself as much as to me. "Tyler just got kicked out by his landlord. He needed a place to stay. His wife's pregnant." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I snapped back, my voice sharp and furious. That has nothing to do with throwing Grandpa out like garbage. Tyler walked into the living room after finishing up with the movers. He joined the conversation, sounding almost smug as he said, "Olivia's pregnant. We need a home. Grandpa's just staying with you for a while." After that, I hit my breaking point. I pointed straight at him and shouted, my voice filled with rage, "Shut your mouth! If you wanted Grandpa to stay with me, you should have talked to me. Don't dump him at my door at 5 in the morning like trash." At that moment, Olivia looked unsettled by how intense things had gotten. She turned to Tyler, her voice pleading, "Maybe we should just get a hotel for now. I don't want Grandpa to be homeless because of us." My dad suddenly shot up from the sofa when she finished her sentence. He stormed over to where Grandpa and I were standing, his eyes blazing with anger. He pointed at the door and yelled in a threatening voice, "Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the cops." After that outburst, Brian had had enough. He stepped forward, gently took Grandpa's arm, as if to shield him, then turned to my parents and said, his voice full of fury, "You two are worse than animals. From now on, we'll take care of him. Remember this day." And just like that, we walked out of that house without glancing back. No goodbyes, no parting words, just heavy silence and a crushing sense of betrayal. Once we were back in the car, Grandpa turned to us with warm, grateful eyes and said, his voice sincere, "Thank you both for standing up for me." After hearing him say that, Brian and I felt our anger ease. I looked at Brian, and without saying a word, he nodded. He knew what I was thinking. A few seconds later, I turned to Grandpa and said, "From now on, you're staying with us. We'll take care of you." Grandpa gave a gentle smile, the first one I'd seen from him all day, and nodded in agreement. As we drove home, I realized our lives had changed completely. But maybe, just maybe, it was the best change we could have made. After leaving my parents' house, I didn't take Grandpa straight home. Instead, I decided to drive directly to the local police station to report what had happened, to file a case for elder abandonment. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the right thing to do. At first, when he realized what I intended to do, Grandpa tried to stop me. He said he didn't want the family to become the subject of gossip for dragging each other into legal trouble, but after some gentle persuasion, he agreed to report the incident. When we stepped into the police station, the air was formal and serious. The officer who took our case was Blake, a middle-aged cop with graying hair and sharp, experienced eyes. He listened carefully as we explained what had happened. Looking into Grandpa's eyes, and at the 2 worn-out suitcases beside him, Blake spoke firmly, "We'll file an official report. Abandoning an elderly person is a serious matter." I handed over everything we had, the security footage from our front gate, the note from my parents, and a detailed account of what had happened. Grandpa also gave his statement, his voice trembling but steady and clear. After collecting all the information, Blake contacted Adult Protective Services, APS. Within an hour, a representative named Grace arrived at the station. She sat beside Grandpa and said gently, "Mr. William, we're here to ensure you're safe and have a secure place to live." Then she asked about his health, any special care he might need, and what he wanted going forward. Grandpa answered softly, "Daisy and her family have taken good care of me. I want to stay with them." Grace nodded, then turned to me and asked, "Are you willing to continue caring for Mr. William? We'll offer support. Stay in touch." Without a moment's hesitation, I told her, "I'm more than willing. Grandpa will have a home with us." Once we finished the official statements and documentation, Blake and Grace assured us the case would be taken seriously. Grace gave me her contact number and scheduled a home visit for the following week. We finally left almost 3 hours after arriving at the station. On the ride home, Grandpa sat quietly, gazing out the window, probably still trying to process everything he'd just been through. That night, Sophie was overjoyed when she learned Grandpa would live with us. She had only seen him a few times during the holidays, but had always adored him. She bounced around the house excitedly, eagerly telling Grandpa all about her favorite games. Watching her with that kind of energy, Grandpa smiled warmly at her. From that day on, he officially became part of our household. We set him up in a small but cozy room with everything he needed to feel comfortable and at home. One day after Grandpa moved in with us, we had a warm Christmas dinner. It was just the 4 of us gathered around a small dining table, but I genuinely believe it was the happiest Christmas Grandpa had experienced in years. The room was decorated with twinkling string lights and a small Christmas tree that Sophie had helped us decorate. The house was filled with the delicious aroma of roasted chicken and apple pie, both lovingly prepared by Brian throughout the day. When it came time for gifts, I handed Grandpa a carefully wrapped box. Inside was a brand new winter coat lined with thick Sherpa fleece for warmth. As soon as he saw it, Grandpa was visibly moved. He slipped it on immediately and said, his voice catching, "Thank you, I needed this." Next, Brian gently handed him a navy blue wool scarf, his favorite color. Brian smiled and said, "I hope this keeps you a little warmer on cold days." But the most special gift came from Sophie. She ran to her room and returned holding a drawing she had made that morning at school, with help from her teacher, Miss Jennifer. In the picture, drawn with innocent, uneven strokes but full of heart, were 4 people standing hand in hand beside a Christmas tree. Sophie spoke with childlike excitement. "Great-Grandpa, this is our family. I made you the tallest one." Grandpa took the picture with trembling hands, his eyes lighting up with emotion. In a soft, steady voice, he promised her, "I'll keep this safe, sweetheart. Every time I look at it, I'll think of you and our family." Once we had exchanged gifts and the mood had settled, Grandpa suddenly got up and entered his room. A few minutes later, he returned holding an envelope. He pulled out $1,200 in cash and handed it to us. Speaking humbly, he said, "I don't have much, but I'll give you my pension and senior assistance every month. It's all I can contribute." Seeing this, I gently pushed his hand back and said firmly, "You don't need to worry about that. Just stay here with us. We'll take care of everything. Keep the money in case you ever need it." Realizing I wouldn't accept it, Grandpa reluctantly tucked the envelope away, but I could still see the worry in his eyes. Deep down, he feared he was a burden. And right then, a wave of anger toward my family surged, stronger than ever. I suddenly understood. All those years, every month, Grandpa had handed over that small amount of money to them, and they still treated him like he was in the way. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never let Grandpa feel like an outsider in my home. 1 week later, on a Monday afternoon, while I was at the office, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my dad. I saw his name on the screen and, without hesitation, declined the call. Less than 30 seconds later, he called again. This time, after thinking it over for a moment, I decided to pick up, curious to hear what he had to say. But the moment I answered, he immediately shouted, his voice full of rage, "You told him to file a complaint against me, didn't you?" Hearing his aggressive, accusatory tone, a wave of frustration rose in me, but I didn't want to argue or get dragged into another pointless fight. I kept my voice calm and responded plainly, "Abandoning an elderly person is unacceptable. See you in court." I hung up without waiting for his response. Then I went straight into my contacts and blocked both my dad's and mom's numbers. I didn't want to hear another excuse, threat, or fake apology from either of them. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again with a new message. It was from Tyler. The message read, "You think dragging the whole family into court is right?" Reading his text, I felt a mix of anger and deep disappointment, but I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down and took a few moments to think carefully about what I wanted to say. After nearly 5 minutes of silence, I picked the phone back up and typed my response. Clear, firm, and without emotion. "You and our parents will pay for what you did. Goodbye." When I saw the read receipt pop up below my message, showing that Tyler had seen it, I didn't hesitate. I went straight into settings and blocked his number too. Sitting back at my desk, I felt a strange relief, like a weight had been lifted. I had cut off all contact with the people who had hurt my grandfather. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain, Grandpa would be protected and respected, how he always should have been. Because the case involved elder abandonment, just 2 weeks after APS officially opened an investigation, a public hearing was scheduled at the local county courthouse. That day, I arrived on time with Grandpa and Brian. My parents and Tyler sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their faces tense and full of resentment. One remarkable detail stood out. My parents couldn't find an attorney to represent them. A local lawyer said they had turned the case down because my parents were in the wrong and had no legal ground to stand on. And as the lawyer added, part of the reason was simple. They intensely disliked seeing children abandon their aging parents. During the hearing, I presented all of our evidence to the court. First was the security camera footage, which clearly showed my parents dropping Grandpa off in front of my house at 5:32 a.m. In the video, they coldly unloaded him and his 2 suitcases without saying a word. Next, I submitted the handwritten note they left behind. "You take care of him. We can't deal with this anymore." Scribbled quickly in blue ink, it spoke heartless and utterly irresponsible volumes. As for my parents, they failed to provide a single document proving they had given Grandpa the legally required 30-day written notice before asking him to leave. That made it clear they had acted suddenly and unlawfully. But what pushed things over the edge was the financial investigation. The court discovered that Grandpa had been giving them $1,200 monthly from his pension and Social Security benefits, money he had handed over consistently. When Judge Johnson heard this, he was visibly disturbed. The frustration in his voice was undeniable. After reviewing all the undeniable evidence and hearing testimonies from both sides, the judge delivered a stern condemnation. The defendants not only abandoned a family member in harsh conditions, but also financially exploited the victim over a long period. This behavior is deeply reprehensible. He then announced the final ruling. My parents were fined $3,000, sentenced to 12 months of probation, and prohibited from leaving the county during that time. Just as the judge was finishing the sentencing, my father suddenly lost control. He jumped to his feet and shouted at Grandpa, his voice filled with rage, "You're not my father! No real father would drag his son to court like this!" Immediately, Judge Johnson banged his gavel hard against the bench and commanded in a powerful voice, "Order! Silence in the courtroom!" Once the tension in the room settled, the judge turned to my father, his eyes sharp and unwavering, and asked a single cutting question. "And is there any son who would throw his father out of the house at 5:00 a.m. in freezing weather?" My dad fell utterly silent. He slowly sank back into his seat, his face pale, unable to respond or defend himself. That silence said it all. Tyler, sitting nearby, kept his head down, as if for the first time he truly grasped the weight of what they had done to Grandpa. We quietly left the courtroom and walked through the courthouse doors when the hearing ended. No one said a word. There were no goodbyes, no parting glances, only heavy silence and eyes that refused to meet. But the consequences of that day didn't stop at the courthouse steps. News of the trial spread quickly in the small community where my parents lived. Their cruelty couldn't be ignored in a tight-knit neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. Neighbors began to turn their backs. The local grocery store stopped serving them. They were no longer invited to community meetings. Even old friends avoided them. As we drove home, I looked over at Grandpa and felt a quiet sense of relief. Justice, even if delayed, had finally been served. But at the same time, a part of me felt a deep, quiet sadness, because I had taken my parents to court. 1 year after the lawsuit, our lives had settled into a peace we hadn't known in a long time. Grandpa had become a part of our family. Not just someone we cared for, but an essential part of our daily life. He wasn't just staying with us, waiting to be looked after like a burden. On the contrary, he contributed in his own quiet, meaningful ways. There were days when Brian and I came home exhausted from work, only to be greeted by the warm, mouth-watering smell of dinner already prepared. Years ago, Grandpa had spent 15 years working as a chef at an Italian restaurant in San Francisco. And even now, those culinary skills were still as sharp as ever. He could turn the most basic ingredients into dishes full of flavor, from creamy, decadent pasta carbonara to steaming bowls of chicken soup infused with secret spices only he knew. Sophie especially loved the afternoons she spent with Grandpa in the kitchen, watching him cook dinner. He patiently taught her how to chop vegetables safely and told her stories from his younger days. Those quiet, joyful moments became some of Sophie's most cherished memories. Brian appreciated Grandpa's help more than words could express. After long, stressful days, coming home to a warm meal already waiting on the table gave him a sense of relief and deep gratitude. Grandpa also regularly helped us watch Sophie in the evenings whenever we had to stay late at work to meet deadlines. I used to joke that Grandpa was our in-house chef. Life felt complete. We were a real family, each of us playing our part and giving something. Grandpa had found joy and purpose in caring for us, and we, in return, received his love, wisdom, and quiet strength. But that perfect peace came to a sudden and jarring end the moment news broke that Grandpa had won a $52.3 million jackpot. At the time, I had no idea that the money would bring a storm of challenges, ones we were in no way prepared for. Grandpa hit the jackpot in January 2024, specifically on January 15th, a date I'll never forget. He'd had a quiet routine of buying one weekly lottery ticket for the past year. He never played random numbers. He always chose the same set, a sequence that held deep meaning. His birthday, 12. Grandma's birthday before she passed, 28. Mine, 05. Brian's, 17. And Sophie's, 23. He used to say he believed those numbers would bring luck because they represented the people he loved most. That evening, when the winning numbers were announced on TV, Grandpa came running toward us, holding his ticket in his trembling hands. His voice choked with emotion as he said, "Kids, I think I just won." Brian and I immediately sat down to double-check, then triple-check every single number against the official results. And it was true. Every digit matched. The prize was $52.3 million. Our first reaction wasn't celebration. It was shock. Brian and I locked eyes, both of us visibly shaken. We weren't naive. We knew that kind of money didn't just change bank accounts. It could change people, relationships, even the way a family functions. Brian whispered to me, "Daisy, I'm scared. What if this ruins the peace we have?" And I felt the same fear. We'd heard too many stories, how money split families apart and twisted people into something unrecognizable. I worried Grandpa would become a target. Worse, I worried my parents would come crawling back. But Grandpa, as if reading our thoughts, took both our hands in his and said calmly, "Don't worry, money can't change the kind of love we have in this family." Unfortunately, our fears came true because California law requires that the identity of lottery winners be made public. The news of Grandpa's jackpot spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, the information reached my parents and distant relatives we hadn't heard from in years. And just like vultures smelling something dead, they descended, showing up at our home, ready to claim their share. That was the moment I realized the real battle was only beginning. Just one day after the news of Grandpa's lottery win went public, my parents and Tyler showed up at the small rental house we called home. What surprised me even more was that they brought Tyler and Olivia's newborn, who was barely 3 months old. When I opened the door, their demeanor was nothing like the last time we had seen them at court. Suddenly, they were full of regret, unusually humble. My mom, in a syrupy, repentant tone, looked at Grandpa and said, "Dad, we know we were wrong. Let's forget the past and move forward as a family." My father nodded in agreement and offered to take Grandpa back into his care. He said, "I've thought it through. My house is bigger than Daisy's. I can take better care of you, Dad." Even Tyler, who had never shown Grandpa an ounce of respect, lowered his head and apologized. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't appreciate you before." But Grandpa, with all his years of hard-earned wisdom, saw straight through them. Calm but sharp, he looked them in the eyes and said, "You're here because of my lottery money, right?" Once he called them out, they dropped the act. The mask came off, and their true motives were laid bare. My father, no longer pretending to be humble, suddenly turned demanding. "You owe me $20 million, he said, his voice loud and entitled. "I'm your only son." Grandpa responded, still calm, but now with biting finality. "No son throws his father out on the street like you did." Not to be left out, Tyler spoke up too, making his shameless demand. "You should give me $5 million for the baby. Sophie is your great-granddaughter, but so is Emily. It's unfair if you give Daisy everything and leave us with nothing." Grandpa scoffed. Then with a bitter smile, he replied, "The day I was thrown out like a stray dog, you were the first to cheer it on." Then Grandpa turned to me and said firmly, "Daisy, close the door. If they don't leave, call the police." With that, he turned and walked calmly back inside. Seeing they could no longer manipulate Grandpa, they looked at me with pure hatred and bitterness, as if I were the one to blame for their downfall. Then they took the baby and left, defeated. But things didn't calm down after that. They got worse. Distant relatives, people we didn't even know existed, began showing up at our door asking for money. Some claimed to be second cousins. Some said they were old friends. Others spun up lies about medical bills or fake debts to get a cut of Grandpa's winnings. In the end, I had to call the local police and request intervention to protect our family from these relentless opportunists. As I sat inside, watching officers escort strangers away from our front gate, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness. Not about the money, but about what it revealed in people when it entered the picture. Over the next 3 months, Brian and I had a quiet, unspoken agreement. Neither of us would bring up Grandpa's $52.3 million lottery win. We kept living exactly as we had before, refusing to let the money change our family dynamic or how we treated him. I continued going to work as usual. Brian stayed at his job at the real estate firm. Sophie still went to school every day with the same carefree spirit. Grandpa kept cooking his delicious dinners and telling Sophie bedtime stories each night. That sense of normalcy, that steady, grounded routine, was our most valuable thing, and we were determined to protect it. Still, I knew Grandpa needed help managing that kind of money safely and legally. So I took the initiative and brought him to the bank to open a private account, ensuring everything was confidential. I also contacted a highly respected financial attorney in our area, Mr. Martinez, a seasoned estate manager with over 20 years of experience. Mr. Martinez guided Grandpa through safe investment strategies, tax planning, and shielding his assets from predators and manipulators. Throughout all of this, my role was purely supportive, never intrusive. I never asked, hinted at the money, or acted interested. Whether Grandpa had millions or none at all didn't matter. What mattered was that he was safe, cared for, and truly happy. And then Grandpa gave us a gift so unexpected, so far beyond anything Brian or I could have ever dreamed, that we were left completely speechless. It was a quiet evening in late March 2024. Sophie had already gone to bed, and Brian was in the kitchen washing dishes. That's when Grandpa called the two of us over to sit with him on the couch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, handing it to me with a warm, grateful look in his eyes. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were ownership documents for a beachfront resort in Monterey. The listed owners, Daisy and Brian. Stunned, we read through the documents over and over again, barely able to believe what we were seeing. It was a 4-star resort, 50 rooms, a fine dining restaurant, a luxury spa, and a sweeping view of the Pacific Ocean. After giving us a moment to process it, Grandpa looked at us and said gently, "Do you remember? About a year ago, you and Brian told me about your dream to open a little seaside resort where families could come to relax and make memories." His words brought the memory rushing back. One night, while watching a movie together, Brian and I had casually told Grandpa about our dream. If we ever had the money, we'd love to open a small resort where we could work side by side and spend more time with our family. It was a simple dream, spoken from the heart. We never thought it would happen. Now, holding those papers in my hands, my throat tightened and tears started to fall. This wasn't just a gift of property. It was a gift of trust, love, and deep belief in who we were and the life we wanted to build. Grandpa placed a hand on both our shoulders and said, "I want you two to have a good future, not because I have money now, but because you deserve it." In that moment, I couldn't say anything. I just sat there next to Brian, holding back tears, whispering the only words that came to mind. "Thank you, Grandpa." After finding out we were the resort's new owners, I decided to do something I had dreamed of for a long time. I bought a spacious 4-bedroom home in the suburbs of California, not to show off, but to finally give Grandpa the kind of life he deserved. The house had an open yard, a ground floor bedroom just for him, and a small garden where we planted the types of ornamental trees he had loved since he was young. After everything he had done for us, this was the very least I could do in return, to give him a safe, peaceful, and dignified life. At the same time, Brian and I made another life-changing decision, to quit our jobs. We officially left our companies to focus all our energy on running the resort. No more weekly reports, no more endless meetings, no more living within the 4 walls of an office. Instead, we poured our hearts into every part of the business, every room, every guest, every breakfast served. During that time, my parents and Tyler went completely silent. They didn't text, call, or show up anywhere near us. What no one saw coming was what Grandpa did next. He filed for a permanent restraining order against them, not just for himself, but also on behalf of me, Brian, and even our little girl. He stood before the judge and said calmly and clearly that this wasn't an act of revenge. It was a necessary step to protect the future of the people he loved. From then on, our new house truly became a home. There were no more threats or shadows from the past, just peace and the kind of beginning we had always hoped for. 1 year after Grandpa won the lottery, the first piece of news we heard about the old family was this. My parents had kicked Tyler out of their house. From what I learned from neighbors, Tyler and Olivia's lives had become tough after Grandpa refused to give them the money. Not long after, Olivia decided to divorce Tyler. She couldn't handle the pressure or his increasingly aggressive behavior, as he kept blaming her for not convincing Grandpa to give them another chance. Then one day at the end of April, Olivia called me. She asked, pleaded for a chance to see Grandpa. At first, I was hesitant, suspicious. Maybe she was coming on Tyler's behalf, or this was another attempt to get close to the money. But that day, Olivia showed up alone, carrying only Emily, their daughter, now just over a year old. No Tyler, no parents, just a young mom with a tired, worn face, clearly carrying the weight of everything on her own. When she saw Grandpa, she broke down crying and apologized sincerely. Through tears, she said, "Grandpa, I'm so sorry for what happened. It was because of me that they kicked you out." She explained how back then she had been pregnant, entirely dependent on Tyler, and terrified to speak up. She had wanted to defend Grandpa, but Tyler had been controlling and threatening. She hadn't known how to stand up to him. Listening to her, Grandpa didn't ask questions or blame her. He nodded and said, "I understand what you were going through. I don't hold it against you." After about 10 minutes, Olivia left with Emily. She didn't ask for money. She didn't request help. She came only to apologize. But that same afternoon, Grandpa did something unexpected. He contacted Mr. Martinez, our attorney, and asked him to create a trust fund for Emily, $200,000. He specified that the money be released monthly, under strict legal supervision, to ensure Emily would have everything she needed to grow, learn, and eventually attend college. When Olivia found out, she wanted to thank Grandpa in person, but he declined. Instead, he asked me to pass along a message. I did it for Emily. She's innocent. But as for my true grandchild, that's Daisy. As for my parents, they moved away. Tyler called again to beg for help, but Grandpa refused to take the call. Through this story, there's one thing I want to say. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and who stands by you when everything falls apart, not just when things are going well. So now I'll leave it to you. What would you have done if you found your grandfather abandoned at your front door? And do you believe that real family comprises the people who stay no matter what, even if they don't share your blood? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear stories like yours. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it moved you. Thanks so much for listening.